How's it going, everyone? Doc here with Eyes Wide Shot Gaming, and today we are breaking down our slippery slider of a grenade, the Slippy build. Check it out. Alrighty, let's jump right into the breakdown of what our equipment, skills, and specializations are. We'll go straight for the grenade, which is our main damage dealer. It's the fully loaded Slippy. This is a legendary grenade that is dropped by Shadow Pelt. Now, we got pretty lucky and had Overflow roll on our drop, allowing us to get 3 charges instead of the regular 2 charges. This grenade has the perk Swordfish, which allows our grenade to deal melee damage on detonation. In order to kind of synergize and really dish out some decent damage with each throw, we try to have everything funnel into either melee damage or ordnance damage itself. So our rep kit is the Mega Steroidal Recorporator. It's not the healing or the cooldown, but its perks. Hard Hitter, which on use grants an increase to melee damage dealt by 40% for 8 seconds, which this is more than enough time to toss out 3 grenades at a boss. Along with it, we have Elemental Affinity. Now, this perk on use grants an increase to elemental damage by 25% for 8 seconds. And since our Slippy also delivers a wild amount of fire damage per hit, not counting damage over time, this will be a huge plus to our build. For our enhancement, we have the Decimating Hazardous Lead Curtain. Now, we don't so much care about the top rolls. What we are seeking is the gun status effect damage as well as a specific gun status effect damage, which will all make sense as to why once we get to specializations. But what I will say now is we are seeing some weird stuff increasing our damage when it shouldn't be. The shield we have on is the Spunky Sidestepping Heavyweight. This is a masterful shield for any melee build due to the Bare Knuckle perk, which on melee hit, it consumes an armor segment to grant us an increase of 100% to our melee damage. And when our armor shield is empty, we have a baseline increase of 50% to our melee damage. Along with it, we have Flanking to increase movement speed by 10% when armor shield is broken, and Spunky, which gives us an increase of up to 20% when our armor shield is broken. Ideally, we would want the perk Boxer on the shield to roll, but after something like 3 days of farming, this is the best we could acquire. Finally, we get to the class mod. Since we are making this build on our Vex, we have opted to use the Slashing Fire Dancer class mod. Now, the perks up top are decent rolls since both of those skills will be needed, but what we really are looking for is melee damage, status effect damage, and ordnance damage. Sadly, again, after spending days farming for a Fire Dancer, this is the best we could muster up, which although heartbreaking still allows us to do wildly high damage for such a goofy grenade. Our main weapon of choice is going to be any sniper rifle since we have an enhancement that has sniper rifle status effect chance that has fire damage on it. Now, if you are using an enhancement with any other weapon, then use that said weapon. It seems like our specialization is increasing our fire damage and fire tick damage depending on if we are using a weapon that has fire on it and equipped. Now, I'll go into more details as we go on. Our firmware is pretty self-explanatory. We have 2 points into Gadgets Ahoy for the ordnance cooldown duration decrease of 15% and the ordnance damage increase by 20%. We also have 2 points into Real Big Fist, which buffs up our melee damage by 40%. And finally, 1 point into Action Fist, which gives us another boost of 15% to melee damage. For our skills and the whole skill tree breakdown, we are focusing heavily between just 2 trees. Again, we are steering clear of anything from perks to weapons that might be nerfed in the near future. So we start by going down the Phase Familiar tree. 3 points into Hasty Fiends for an increase to movement speed by 15% and more importantly, increase to damage reduction by 20%. And to get to the next row, we throw 2 points into Enchantment for bonus kinetic damage with guns while we have our action skill active. From there, we dump 5 points into Yowl and Bay, which will increase our familiar's maximum health by 40% and increase our gun damage by 25% for 8 seconds after commanding the familiar. Next up, we put 5 points into Claw and Bang. Now this is a big one. This will increase our melee damage by 40% and ordnance damage by 30%, which in turn is just a buff to our Slippy Grenade's damage by 70%. And the last thing on this skill tree is the Elemental Essence. This will buff up our elemental damage by 16% and double it while our action skill is active. The augment we have on is the Vorpal Fang, just because of the fact that it deals melee damage and has a decently low cooldown. The rest of our points are allocated into the 4th seal skill tree. Now we start with 5 points in the Cold Iron skill to increase our gun damage, which will go hand in hand with our overall damage due to our specializations. We throw another 5 points into Fell Inscriptions to raise our melee damage by 35%, and inherently also increase our health capacity by 30%. Next, we put 5 points into Portents of Suffer for the 35% increase to our status effect damage, since our Slippy isn't just doing melee and ordnance, we're also doing fire damage. Now we go and invest 5 points into Recurrence. Now, this will allow our melee damage to be increased by up to 50% when doing any kind of constant attacking. And here is where we get into our big damage dealers. Reverberations. With the class mod, our melee damage dealt has a chance to deal incendiary melee damage, increasing by 50%, and the damage dealt is 270% of the initial damage. Since our initial melee damage is so high, this will be able to proc up to 800,000 damage per hit. And finally, Burnt Offering. This will further increase our incendiary damage by 64% and incendiary status effect damage by 48%. Our specializations is where we start to see this build be tied in a very nice and neat bow. We throw 20 points into Survivor, 20 into Brute, which allows us to unlock Gadgeteer, which we also throw 20 points into for the Ordnance cooldown. And then we put the rest of our points into Runner, which will increase our melee damage to the max. The 4 perks we chose for this build are the Best Defense, for an increase to damage dealt based on the fullness of our shield or health, whichever has higher capacity, giving us an increase of 30% to our damage. Followed by Fragmentation Payload. This allows our Ordnance to gain a chance to critically hit enemies as well as increases our Ordnance critical hit damage. This will translate to a higher incendiary damage proc. Next up is the Full Spectrum Arsenal, which allows our ordnance damage to benefit from 50% of our gun damage. So whatever damage increase our guns get, 50% of that goes to ordnance, which seems to function more so with the status effect damage and any damage over time more so than anything else, which is exactly how our last skill, Bare Arms, acts, as well with melee damage benefits from gun damage by 50%. Both these skills seem to increase our status effect damage, with a small increase to our actual melee and/or ordnance damage. So with all of this combined, let's check out the damage we can do to the dummies as well as see how high we can get our damage stats to increase. As it stands, with Boxer on our shield missing and ordnance damage on our class mod missing, we still can get our melee damage to increase well over 400%, and with ideal rolls, we can see that number go all the way past 500%. Which along with our gun damage at 95.2%, ordnance damage at 97.6%, and incendiary damage at 121%, we can see our DPS with this build go from 2 to 3 million per second, all the way to 5 million damage per second. Don't forget, since the Slippy bounces around and splits off after initial hit, we will be doing more damage to larger enemies. We hope this build is something everyone enjoys using, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and until next time, so long.